When we read through the Gospels, one of the things that we find Jesus doing on a regular basis is gathering together with God's people on the appointed day for worship. Sometimes it was in the synagogue on every Sabbath day where he gathers for worship with the people of God. Sometimes it was at the temple when he's going there for feast days. Sometimes it would just be regular weekend services. Other times it would be holidays. But whatever format and whatever context we find it, Jesus can be found gathering with the people of God on the appointed day for worship. What that really means is that Jesus didn't seem to believe that he could worship God at home in his own way. He always found that it was his responsibility to gather together with the community of believers for a corporate worship experience. The synagogue service that Jesus would have attended in the first century was really mostly about Scripture and prayer, and probably in that order, since most of their prayers were the recitations of Scripture. The public reading of Scripture was a vital component for the early Jewish synagogue service. They would read the Scriptures and they would pray the Scriptures. If there was a qualified male present, then they might invite that male to explain the Scriptures. But if there wasn't someone there who could explain the Scriptures, they would make sure to read them and then have the prayers. Functionally, what that means is that they cared more that people knew the text more than they understood the text. Their focus was on that you knew it, not whether or not you understood it well. So when Jesus goes to the synagogue service, when he gathers for worship, there's a heavy dose of reading of Scripture, heavy doses of prayer. Contrast Jesus' experience with sometimes what we do in the modern church, where our focus is on explaining the text and telling you what it means and how you're to live it, rather than on the public reading of those scriptural texts. Very often we will explain the text to you all day long, and if you're lucky, we'll put it up on the screen for you to read. When you put all of this stuff together, it's easy to see how so much of what we tend to argue and fight about really pales in comparison to the things that mattered in Jesus' synagogue worship experience. Scripture and prayer were the most important elements. We're not even really sure in the first century evidence whether or not there was music or singing in those synagogue services. They may have sung the prayers, but even their singing was the singing was scriptural content. Scripture and prayer were the most important things. And when we concern ourselves with style more than substance, when we concern ourselves with presentation rather than Scripture, it doesn't really match Jesus' spiritual experience. Jesus gives us a prime example of what being spiritual really means in the context of corporate worship. And that means giving more attention to loving God through His Word, through prayer, and through prayer, and to loving one another as we worship together.